in the pursuit of educational excellence. Just a little bit about me, because I know that Georgina has made an excellent introduction. However, you don't know the details about what I do. So I started off as a secondary teacher, English specialist, and around 2014, I left the classroom and I started tutoring. And I found that being in the classroom didn't give me the opportunity to actually go into that niche area to provide for the students in the way that you do on a one-to-one or small group session. And that interest developed with time. And then I opened up Tutor Supply. And through that, I found that a lot of the students that were coming through my company were vulnerable and had a lot of learning difficulties. And so I thought I need to develop myself to engage in that area and to provide for those students. So I became a SENCO. And then I thought, I've got a lot of students that come through that are dyslexic, they have dyscalculia, they have, how can I identify those pupils? And then I became an SPLD assessor and specialist teacher. And as that evolved, my company developed even more. I now have a Dyslexia Assessment Centre, and they both run nationally with a global perspective. On top of that, I'm also a teacher at the University of Sunderland. And as I said before, as my tuition became, just developed, my interest in the area of private tuition got stronger, and I embarked on a PhD journey on the impact of private tuition. So that's just a little bit about me. Now, what I'd like to start with is a little bit of historical background on tuition. Now, tuition, as we know it, is started in ancient Greece. And it's British education, as we know, is heavily influenced by the ancient Greeks, who were the protoporhic nation in tuition, and they allowed for private tuition to take place with teachers. Now, at the time, those who tutored were actually educated slaves or hired tutors that were getting paid a small fee to tutor the nobles' people children. And so tuition at the time would take place in public baths, in houses, and even the streets. And now, at the time, there was no measurement of tuition, and the only attainment measurement was the rhetoric and what was called as logos. So male students had to demonstrate to their teachers that they were proficient in their rhetoric, and that was the only measurement that they had to go by. And I found that this is quite an interesting educational philosophy that transpired the rest of the world to engage is what is now the great transfer of knowledge. And the only measured attainment was the rhetoric compared to what we see now. So British education began with the Saxon establishment, but then we've got the cathedral schools around 597. The onset of education involved a religious aspect. Back in the day, you had the priesthoods, and it was through that priesthood that provided tuition. You had grammar schools, and these are the grammar schools that we now see possibly referred to in Shakespeare's plays. And they were schools whereby every child was had the ability to get educated. The introduction of state-funded schools were split. So the schools at the time were split into technical schools, into state-funded schools, and it was not until later on that children were allowed to leave education past the age of 10. I think it was 2015 that students were allowed to leave education at the age of 18. So after many restructures of the educational system, Britain's tripartite system around the 1940s, if I'm not mistaken, saw the splitting of schools, and you have the three main settings. However, this was phased out because then we had the introduction of the comprehensive schooling. Then we've got the national curriculum in the late 1900s, and that was when parents were provided with the power to choose which school they wanted their children to go to. Around the 2000, we've got the introduction of the academies, and it was then that academies became quite prominent and what seemed to be a normalized type of secondary school. Now, the notion of education and its importance has taken various meanings over time, but one aspect remains quite valid, in that education affects a child's longitudinal development. The global aspect of education. Global research has established that education increases individual incomes, it positively correlates with microeconomic growth, it reduces poverty, illiteracy, and income inequality. And the World Bank, UNESCO, UNICEF have all stated that education is one of the most powerful instruments known for reducing poverty and inequality and for laying the basis for sustained economic growth, sound governance, and effective institutions. So policymakers have been reviewing educational standards for a long time now, and we see countries such as we've got Brazil, who have been reviewing their inclusion policy in schools. We've got Asia focusing on private tuition, more so now with the last decade, and recognizing that private tuition is a very important tool in education. We've got Greece and Europe, Greece with what they call asphodisteria. They now use these outside schools, if you like, to reinforce what is being taught in school. And therefore, all this global impact has affects attainment. The UK have for so long attempted to reform education, and we see now the UK levelling up across the cohort, and we see a few reforming bills actually and policing with the introduction of the new NTP plan of 2030. We all know that education is vital for all, young or not. Mind and research has validated the need for education. This is a fact. We need education, and we need education not just to improve standards, although this is the trend. We need education to develop ourselves. But the government has initiated for a long time now, many years, since the early 2000s, that education should be seen through excellence. Now, there is quite an ambivalence and an ambiguity in the definition of what constitutes the term as excellence. So education for excellence As we all know, we've all worked in schools, and if you just remember the IDT framework, is where teachers are expected to demonstrate outstanding skills in mentoring and practice. Now, this is quite challenged now, and it's criticised as teacher accountability being one of the barriers in excellence in education. Amongst the need to identify children who are in need, and also to identify children and their need. The definition of excellence is challenged. Excellence is seen as the quality whereby it's only measured through high achievers' attainment. And this has transpired through each political educational reform. And we see Nikki Morgan's Educational Excellence Everywhere in 2016, whereby the paper promoted excellence as the key term for provision for children of any socioeconomic background and needs. The paper called for a civilized society in modern Britain. It called for recruiting world-class teachers. And this is an interesting one, and I'll come back to that a bit later on. It also talked about replacing QTS with a new accreditation, and see how all that information fits into tutoring. It also talked about increasing academized leadership, ensuring monitoring all pupil progress in schools, so to see through those who achieve and those who don't. A bit later on into 2021, you've got the DFE outcome plan with Gavin Williamson, and the paper mentioned ways to improve educational standards. There is again the mentioning of the levelling up through excellence in education. Now the term comes through here, helping children to catch up on long lost learning due to the COVID outbreak, primarily through the NTP agenda. Improve the quality of teaching and delivering of brilliant lessons, and thus raising school standards. Right, so in March this year, the Secretary of State for Education, Nadim Zahawi, brought out his guidance paper on levelling up. And this is now, obviously we know this is the term now, isn't it? We need to all level up, where the need for excellent teachers in the classroom is highlighted as the target for 2030. Research by the EEF, and those who follow the EEF, like myself on Twitter, will know that there's quite a bit out there. So they suggested the need to mimic tuition instruction to the excellence such as that's in classrooms. So there's quite a bit of demand there. This, of course, puts too much pressure on ourselves as tutors or tutors who also teach, or just tutors, because excellence needs to be transmitted into tuition for those who tutor as a hobby, those who don't have the qualification of the necessary skills but learn along the way. Teachers who tutor will work twice as hard to demonstrate adequate skills in the lessons outside the classroom. And this leads me to what Henry said before about tutor burnout. It's hard work. And it's hard work thinking that tuition will be compared to what is being taught in class and what is being expected in the classroom. And if you have a look on the slide itself, it states that by 2030, every child will be taught by an excellent teacher trained in the best evidenced approaches. And there's a key terminology here that we need to look at if we are going to be, if our teaching is going to be monitored, recorded and compared. All teachers will have access to world-class training and professional development at every stage of their career, giving them the expertise and support needed to deliver great teaching. And we need to define those terms, don't we? Teaching will be an attractive, high status profession. We will recruit and retain the best teachers in the subjects and areas that are needed most. High quality early years provision will ensure children have the best possible start to their education, building strong foundations for the rest of their time in school. Now you're going to say, well, Vaso, how does that relate to my tuition practice? Well, it does, because we are the result of what is already there. We are what reinforces what is already there, and we are what replenishes and what sometimes actually put the first bite of knowledge out there where there is none. So what is constituted as best evidence approach, great teaching, excellent teaching, brilliant approaches, is what we are expected to achieve, because don't forget that there is latest guidance out there to suggest how tuition should be taught, how tuition agencies and employment businesses should operate, and how we should function. But that's another session. Right, so as you can see, as a result of COVID, we did not have data available. The only thing we've got is a 2021 data on the government side, and that is considering COVID disruptions. You can see a decrease of 1.3% on the backs compared to the 18-19, and an 8.7 percentage point on the GCSE. However, the government stated that COVID still imposed the need for support, especially to students who are disadvantaged and vulnerable. There are students who don't feel confident, the lack important knowledge that did not transfer to the exams. The government publication Education Recovery in Schools that was published in the spring 2022 this year highlighted, and that's a quote, that the pandemic continued to affect pupils' knowledge and skills, either because content had not been taught when schools were partially closed, or because pupils did not learn well remotely. Now, this brings us to a very important point in terms of resources, in terms of what was available from the schooling side and what became available through the tuition side. And of course, it placed greater emphasis on the NTP agenda, because a lot of the tutors who tutor as a freelance profession also do tutor through the NTP and also do teach at school. So we've got a wide demographic of teacher tutors here. There are a lot of disadvantaged students, there are a lot of SEN students, there are a lot of vulnerable students in schools, and we are the ones that we have to close the gaps. Apart from those teachers in school that have to do also the same thing, we are also the ones that have to take on the job as an additional work. The 2009 DCSF report on barriers, drivers and barriers in educational success, as well as the OECD and the Sutton Trust, that was the very past research around the 2012, have identified that disadvantaged students are more likely to experience low achievement in school. Now, this is reinforced by current research that also suggests the same, and hence the governmental support mechanism. that report highlighted that parental involvement through tuition, parental involvement through the general education of the children, family time, social and economic opportunities have an impact during the adolescent period of the children. Parental socioeconomic choices, which is very important when it comes to us employing the parent and the parent employing the tutor, with the choice of schooling, educational expectations, motivational factors, through that familial aspect are all important factors that determine student educational outcome. And research has suggested, and this is very important, and I'm sure Sarah Lee would agree, and Henry, that familial time, even having one dinner period together as a whole family, has a massive impact on the child and on the child's mental being. Now, time that with what we offer as carers outside the schooling period, we are actually deemed as very, very important factors in a child's life, because what lacks even in familial time, we compensate, because we spend, for people like myself, I spend hours and hours with per student per week, and that's a significant amount of time. So our job has over the time developed. We're not just teaching in the street for half an hour and testing a student on how good they are at speaking, at their rhetoric. We're now going through a lot of hoops, if you like, in order to manage and compensate and develop and achieve of what is expected by not just the parents, the community, and the wider aspect out there. So education. I find the term quite a complex one. Education suggests passing on the ultimate values of a community so that the individual can make them his own. Education suggests not only that what develops in someone is valuable, but also that it involves the development of knowledge and understanding. Whatever else an educated person is, he's one who has some understanding of something. Now, Richard Peters, who wrote Education and the Educated Man, quite a good read, suggested that educated people are defined by those who are taught specifically for a specific purpose and a specific target and subject, and those who have gained knowledge through the wider community, which is your social capital. And he explains that you can distinguish between the two, which is quite an interesting one. And he specifies that education, as he said, is the passing of knowledge. And as a result of the disadvantaged and low attaining pupils, the government has initiated the NTP agenda, whereby tutoring has been taking place during school hours in order to improve attainment. Now, going back to the education and how that ties in with that, if education is transmitted through the wider community, and education, we've got education transmitted through a specific purpose, through specific people, then that breeds a question for quality, and that breeds a question for closing the gaps, and that also breeds the question on conspiracy theory, which was another thing that was set out this morning by UNESCO. If anybody had the chance to listen to that, and I think it's on YouTube, please do listen to it, because it just made me think, how can we as tutors help eliminate that educational conspiracy, and how can we go about it? And I don't know if anybody wants to share their own view on that, but it's an interesting idea on educational conspiracy impacting on tuition, because if we gain knowledge through social capital, then social capital impacts on the quality and adequacy of knowledge that is being transmitted. So that's one to think about when it comes to private tuition, what we gain through the wider net and what we transmit, and whether it is credible. Right, so private tuition, the NTP is an addition to what is already out there and what has been practiced for a very long time, since I would say the Socratic time. Tuition is a reinforcement to what is offered on a national level, and the Centre for Education and Youth, and I think the EEF as well has got it on their website, have said that it is an intense, and this is a quote, it is an intense academic support delivered by a teacher, TA, or other adult. Now, I think we need to define the other adult. So that's something to think about. And before I go on into the specifics, I'd like us to look at the narrative so far. And the narrative so far is the scenario for a historical perspective of a democratic model of education that provides knowledge and skills through an idealistic educational system of excellence. There has been changes in education, in the educational system, and they have ensured the need for greater support, and this has initiated what is the exoteric support to the esoteric support. However, there are still, I find, discrepancies that call to question the rise of private tuition, because there has been a rise in private tuition, and the mimicking of instruction outside the school, which has been the debate for a very long time. It is important to understand that what tutoring provides is nurturing, and it's also an educational provision, one which is not necessarily consistent in schools. It is the skills, it is the knowledge that us as educators, as instructors, utilize in order to disseminate, to transfer quality provision inside or outside the school. Parents who engage in tuition do so because there is a national need to develop skills, and there's a national need to develop qualities that are perceived as often lacking in schools, and social mobility, in particular the Northeast, has shown that disadvantaged parents would prefer to engage in private tuition as a system that compensates, that stands for reliant education. And they also stated that they would be willing to pay the costing to receive the desired outcome in attainment. Now, globally, if we think of Asia, in Asia part, private tuition can be considered as quite stressful, and China has developed a new policy with tutors, whereby one of the things that it states is that children should not be doing tuition in outside schooling, weekends, because it might cause stress. However, it is argued that private tuition impacts positively on the mental health of both parents and students, because it eliminates that insecurity that breeds through schooling, and it is us as the tutor nation that compensate and develop that what lacks in school. So children develop confidence, they develop their self-esteem, and they become ready for the exams. So parents are an important part in the engagement of private tuition. Parents are interested in engaging caring, motivated tutors who can transmit knowledge that is not necessarily shared in the depth required in schools. And global research suggests that parental involvement in schools impact the longitudinal development in children, and private tuition is compensating for what lacks in the current pedagogy. Parents have over the time questioned national education, and there is evidence to suggest that education is in need of reform, which will then question the uniform approach of pedagogy. Excellence in education is measured by parents in terms of achievement. However, we must not forget that this measurement has been the target by schools as an imposed structure. And this calls to question whether the current grading system is efficient, bearing in mind the COVID effect. But then you're going to say, Professor, how does that relate to me? Well, it does, because we teach for the curriculum, and therefore we have to make sure that those parents who overpay in order to gain those results do so because they want us to teach on the curriculum. Now, Mongon and Chapman in Allen's report suggested that school effectiveness overall is in terms of teacher quality, strategies that teachers employ in the classroom, and the learning climate that is fostered within that classroom by the teachers is impacting pupil educational outcomes. And it was, I think, Hay and Bears that stated that classroom effectiveness is being impacted by a range of factors, and Ofsted, the latest guidance of Ofsted, insists that a national attainment agenda after a 2-year gap is important. And anybody who knows SENCO is a very important figure, especially in the disadvantaged area, has provided a logical solution in that consistency is key. Consistency in the quality of provision inside and outside the classroom. He said that it should be utilised both sides on a national level, and this questions the current provision that is offered through the medium of tuition. Now, this slide reminds me of the previous session and what was said about teacher burnout, which links quite greatly to tutor accountability. Tutors work, and they work hard. They work hard to produce the results. And it was the TS that shared that teachers leave the profession and they enter tutoring. There are statistics that show that teachers have left the profession more so the last few years in order to turn into tutoring because of various factors, one of them being the monetary value, which is great. So a monetary addition is an important aspect, and it has long been suggested that teachers are tutors and tutors are teachers. Yet there's a question of the subject knowledge and what is transferred inside and outside the classroom, and what is consistent through that practice. So subject knowledge is important. We want to develop those children's needs. However, accuracy of information and teaching for the curriculum is an emphasis that is often placed in front of us. What we need to stress here is that quality is not limited to qualifications, and there are tutors out there who, as Peter said, would gain knowledge through the social capital. However, that needs to be vetted. So that knowledge minus conspiracies is adequate knowledge for impact. And going back to Morgan's policy in 2016, considering that tuition is a global fact, would that constitute the World Forum, Tutor Forum? And that brings us to the quality and the evaluation of the current provision. And I promise I'm not going to keep you too long, because I know it's lunchtime already. What constitutes pedagogy in schools to what is provided as outside schooling and education through private tuition is clearly seen through national statistics. Although there's no recent data from the latest examination, national examinations, recent research has suggested that private tuition has increased, and that was since 2019. I can't remember the percentage, but the Sutton Trust has released the latest research is in 2019, and this has shown a great impact in attainment. So, as I've already mentioned, the quality of provision by teachers, by tutors with adequate subject knowledge is a highlighted factor. And it'll be interesting to see whether, as a tutor, how do you measure the quality of provision, whether that is through your termly results or your yearly results. Do you measure provision through parental feedback or student rhetoric, or do you measure it numerically? Is it through a dialogic view? How do tutors measure impact? Because everybody has got a different system, and everybody has got a different monitoring system. So that's something that is interesting. Now, going on to online private tuition, that has increased as well since 2009. There's research on it through Komlenovich that suggests that especially higher universities, but schools also are now resorting to online digital classrooms or hybrid models. And I think it's Germany that has invested a good few millions on digital private tuition that is now becoming quite the norm. However, although research suggests that it is the middle class of 30% who are able to use online means, we've got to think of the disadvantaged ones or the similar social groups that will need to seek ways to join that movement of online teaching and assessment. Europe, the UK, China are some of the countries that are recorded to have majorly invested in hybrid tuition. And there's evidence to suggest the effect on attainment. In China, cram models, however, are the most favourable means of conducting tuition. Although one-to-one is obviously, as we know, impactful, there is debate over how small is the small group, as tuition, once monetized, it can get out of hand. And while striving for excellence, monetization can hinder quality. And one has to ask about the effect of the sizes, the classes of, how big can we have our classrooms in private tuition, and does it work? Does it work online, and does it work face-to-face? So although online tuition is on the rise, we need to think of the impact of that. So education has been historically a paid service. The marketisation of private tuition has provided what is that instruction still costs money. With tuition viewed as an alternative, a late almost educational system, research has suggested that private tuition compensates for private schooling, particularly in the UK and following the inflation, but through a global lens. The more prosperous the socioeconomic geography, the more parents will engage in private tutoring. Now, research by Supporting Education Group has shown a 90% of parents engage with tuition, with an increased estimate for the years to come by 7% in 2025. And all that is very well said and done, though as someone who has spent years trying to read, plan, teach, assess, test and retest, test for achievement and personal work gratification, and do it all over again, we all know that work-life balance and well-being is important in our task force, and loneliness is creeping in private tuition. Whereas in schools, we are surrounded by children, we're surrounded by colleagues. When it comes to private tuition, it can be a lonely profession. And that's why it is very important that this task force, and I call it a task force because it is, needs to connect, and the connection needs to be greater. And we need to build a more coherent group of national and international perspective, whereby we share knowledge, we share brilliant pedagogy, and we exchange outstanding values in order to achieve that excellent outcome. So the story so far, education has reformed. We have the education that is passed down from Socrates onto nowadays Ofsted. We have the historical policies. We have the attainment perspective. COVID has created a much larger gap than expected, and we are part of that force that that will need to provide that excellent tuition in order to close the gaps. Parents are in favour of tutors, and they want not just to pass the exams, but they are looking for a nurturing approach, a caring approach. Tutors spend a lot of time teaching, sacrificing family time, and we need to make sure that our well-being is as important as those of our children. Tuition is on the rise, and it's expected to be even more on the rise over the coming years. Tuition is impactful, and we need to make sure that we eliminate those barriers that see tuition as expensive, not of great value, any conspiracy theory with regards to education that could hinder that use of tuition, because it is a valuable aspect of education and what is now a wider society on the whole. As I've mentioned at the beginning, my remit is currently a doctoral researcher on the impact of private tuition, and what I have added here, if you want to take a screenshot, or if Georgia wants the slides afterwards, that's fine by me. Actually, no, it's recorded, Georgina, isn't it? I've attached the 2 links if you want to take part on the survey as tutors, parents, with regards to the research on private tuition. And also there are interviews and forum groups, participation requests. Please do email me direct on my doctoral email, and feel free to express an interest should you wish to take part on this very important journey. If you would like to follow me, please do so. It is always quite nice to be able to widen that task force of tutors out there, and more than happy to chat about any aspects of tuition, to cooperate or to lead and provide any guidance. I have to apologize because I haven't been able to see any questions, any feedback, but I can see there's 23 comments in the chat. Yeah. Right.
Thank you very much. Did you want to open up for questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you sorry? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
Perfect. Yeah, I think people were basically enthralled there, looking at the chat.
There's a lot of information, and I've got two screens in front of me, so I've tried to keep, you know, two bits at the same time. Yes, well, there's quite an interesting one about the
yeah, Emma's comment. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but from the beginning where you were talking about excellence,
yes,
comment, excellence according to who is a good point.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah,
and that's why you do state education, isn't it?
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah,
So you can be your own boss.
Yeah, there is what is out there, what is termed as excellence, and that has changed over time, and so has the terminology on education, and what is there, what is already there, what is expected, and what is already been provided. And therefore these terms, although you think, well, yes, do they? Because you do have now quite a diverse group of provisions and instructors who provide the same thing. And yes, I totally agree. There is a lot of debate on it, on what constitutes excellence, how it should be provided. And as you've seen, what the latest policy suggests on brilliant teaching and brilliant provision and evidence-based, it's debatable.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up as well the point that Atul's made around the UK being quite different in terms of private schools and private tutoring. It's not necessarily the norm, but in India and many other cultures, it's the norm with tutoring available at all price points. It's not necessarily exclusional at all. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that to come and join in?
Yeah, it's a cultural thing where education is sort of revered and respected, and the fact that I mean, I grew up in India, and the fact that you go after school and do work after school is I've had my flatmates here in the UK sort of tell me things like, you're torturing children and ruining their lives by making them work after school. And I said, like, in India it's the norm. It's almost expected to do some work after school, so it's just the amount of effort you put in. And in some cases parents get into small tutoring centers, get private tutors, but it's a very my dad was a private tutor before maths tutor before he joined the diplomatic service. It's very, very much part of the Eastern cultures. Yeah. Here it seems to be sort of a luxury thing.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting to see it change.
Mm-hmm. Now I've encountered a lot of people from India who have actually suggested that yes, it is a luxury, and it is, and it's one that I never had one myself. And so I keep telling my own kids actually that it's, you know, it is something that you should be very grateful that you're receiving. But when it comes to other cultures and when it comes to other provisions, it is something that specifically in say India, that I found from personal experience, it is a split view. I've had parents and professionals themselves who have said that we don't recognise private tuition. We believe that a child should develop themselves. And in fact, I've had individuals that have stated the same thing, whereby their child had been significantly hindered by their cognitive ability, and others who have done marvelous things with tuition, and they have promoted it in such a degree that they have helped those children both in the UK and their own country. So it's quite an ambivalent view, and it's quite an interesting one that we've got to think of, especially when we encounter clients and parents, I hate the word client, from other countries. You know, how do we go about it? Because we've got to at the same time respect their culture and respect their view. However, at the same time, we've got to make sure that the child is our priority and that the child has to learn, especially when there is a vulnerability there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. It's interesting to get lots of different perspectives, which is exactly why we have a festival full of tutors. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did anybody have any other questions for Vaso before we close? Do put them in the chat. Don't be shy. And if you have questions later, I'm sure you have the links to follow Vaso and Tutor Supply online, so you can get in touch a bit
Anytime.
later.
Happy to help.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. There's lots of, as I said at the beginning, you've been doing so much work. There's so much interesting research that people should really just go and read. It's fascinating to find out. More
I will be publishing my my research in the coming year. So happy to share what my results are.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you indeed.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so before we move on, there's a couple of things that I wanted to share. First off, obviously this entire day is sponsored by our lovely sponsors and friends, Nudge, and we're very grateful to them for sponsoring the event. Sarah just said in there, if you're not able to attend, and we'd encourage you to do so, the session at 3:50 from Nudge, talking all about what they do and how it works, and very inspiring sessions from them. If you're not able to attend that live, you can book an individual meeting with one of their representatives at the link in the chat.